So for today's video, we're going to go ahead and do something that's a little bit different. I'm going to be starting a new series where I go ahead and I break down units that you should be using or that you should be considering using on the individual mono teams, or if you were looking into like a rainbow based team, these would be good options as well in certain scenarios. So to start things off, we're going to start off with the AGL based units, and just keep in mind that when I'm doing this video and the other videos for the other types, they're in no particular order. This isn't a 1 through 5 or rating or things like that. This is just me pointing out 5 potential units that you could be using under certain scenarios, once again because it depends on the other units you're using with them, that you could be using in certain scenarios that may be beneficial. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first one that I wanted to mention was AGL Frieza. Now, Frieza in particular, Revive Nightmare Frieza Final Form, has a leader skill of AGL types +2 key. His super attack called Barrage Death Beam causes huge damage to the enemy and lowers attack normally. Passive skill called Nightmare gives a high probability all enemies defense reduced by 25%. And his link skills are Prodigy's Universe's Most Malevolent, Shocking Speed, Revival, Strongest Clan in Space as well. He has 6,473 HP when he's maxed, 6,078 attack, and 2,890 defense. So off the bat, he doesn't appear to be that bad. Like I said, he is farmable, so you can get him up to super attack 10. Let's go ahead and look at some of the pros and the cons of this unit. So for starters, he's an AGL unit that lowers attack. That's very useful because it helps all your other units tank better. You know, I mean, you don't really need it in regards to like Super Vegito and then AGL Golden Frieza. They don't really need it, but it does help you take less damage cumulatively. That being said, he also has Shocking Speed, which is a staple for mono AGL teams. He also has links like Revival and Prodigies that can be relevant with certain teams under certain scenarios, with certain builds and stuff like that. Now, like I said, farmable unit, lowers attack, which is not very common as a whole on AGL units that you'd even consider running. So lowering attack and shocking speed do make this unit worthwhile. I want to kind of point out that he does have a Dokkan Awakening. We'll talk about that in a moment, in his cons actually. So let's look at the cons for this unit. His passive is borderline useless unless against Broly in particular. You know, reducing defense is okay, but you know, the thing about reducing defense is that the game doesn't have much of an onus on that stat. It doesn't do much when you lower defense. It doesn't really do much when your defense is freaking stack high as well as your own units have that, unless they're getting like normal attack. The normal scenarios where they get normal attack and your unit has like over 20,000 defense, they'll probably take double or triple digit damage, so it's not very noticeable in that scenario where you're not going to take much damage. But if it's a super attack, you really just don't see a defense difference really. As far as the enemy goes, you're going to do a tad bit more damage. It's really marginal. The only reason why I say it's against Broly is because Broly, you basically lower his defense enough to where you break his barrier, and then you can beat Broly without using Blazing Battle and things like that. So that's where that would get a little bit more relevance. He does huge damage. That's mainly because he's a natural SR that also is farmable. So at Super Attack 10, he can hit a little bit harder. Of course, with the Mono Vegito leads, he can hit a bit harder as well in that scenario as well. Now, generally, Dokkan Awakenings would be good for units, and don't get me wrong, he does get stat jumps and stuff like that, so he does get better with air quotes up, but he doesn't really get better with those same air quotes up. Again, what I mean by that is when he Dokkan Awakens to Golden Frieza AGL, he does, you know, once again, get stat boost, but at the expense of him losing shocking speed and the lowering of the attack, which are, in my opinion, the two main perks of this unit. So honestly, he's not even worth it as far as, you know, Dokkan Awakening him. So I would keep him as a regular SR. Once again, he's acquirable through the Countdown to Resurrection F event, which comes back every so often. So let's go ahead and move on to the next choice. Now for our next pick, it's a little bit different. We're gonna talk about Frieza's brother, Cooler. So Ultimate Transformation, Cooler, Final Form. Leader skill is strength type units, attack and defense minus 30%. He has Supernova, which does supreme damage to the enemy. Passive skill, rapid offense, gives attack and defense plus 30% for all of your AGL units. His link skills are Strongest Clan in Space, Thirst for Conquest, Cold Judgment, Nightmare, Big Bad Bosses, and Metamorphosis. Rounding the stats out, the guy has 85,000 HP, 7,700 attack, and 44, I guess, 1,000 defense, 4,400, excuse me, defense. That being said, off the cusp, he's a AGL unit, so obviously this is what we're looking at. We're looking at AGL units. Let's look at his pros and the cons. Now, he has a nice leader skill depending on the need. If you're going up against a strength boss, you can play with it a little bit and try to bring a unit like that. I generally would not really do so because I prefer to have leaders that have ki, not even leaders that just give attack and HP, and just I prefer to get ki. Because more consistent super attacks generally means that you'll have an easier time. But that being said, you can get creative with that leader skill that he has. He does supreme damage, which is always a plus, meaning that he'll be one of the harder hitters on your team, of course. Amazing passive for an AGL unit. I want to say that basically there aren't very many units in the game that have passives like this. I mean, the ones that come to mind would probably be that new Rebirth Trunks that, you know, has the sword and stuff like that from Dragon Ball Super. Him and Tech Vegito. There aren't many that have big statistical jump passives for all of your allies like this. So off the bat, that is a really, really, really good passive for attack and defense. So he's obviously with that, if you're going to, you can run him and all your units will hit harder and tank a tad bit better on those normal attacks as well. That being said, his link set also makes him even better on mono villains. So mono villains is probably honestly the best setup for this guy because he does have links like Nightmare, Big Bad Bosses, and Metamorphosis, which depending on units like, I think Buhan has Metamorphosis, I know Janemba has it, so you can recover a bit of HP. I mean, there are AGL units that have it. I believe Baby Vegeta 2 has, or Baby Vegeta, whatever, the one that's farmable has it, so you can do that. But it's just his main setup would be on a villain team, especially with double Rosés, because obviously he's going to make Rosé hit harder, okay? And then on top of that, with Rosé, he's going to get ki consistently, so he can super attack as well. So, you know, and on top of that too is with these passives that say for all allies, that includes himself, so he's giving himself these stat bumps too. So off the bat, really, really good card. There's only a couple of cons. Let's go ahead and talk about him here. So like I said, mono villains is probably the optimal build for this unit, but if you wanted to run him on AGL, you will have a Goku Black Rosé on your team, but that being said, you're only going to have one, so you'd have to kind of keep him paired with him if you wanted this guy to get consistent super attacks, because he doesn't have shocking speed or any optimal key links for mono AGL. The only other real detriment to this unit is that he's a World Tournament exclusive, meaning that you can't really acquire him at this point. He's not even in that banner that Japan has where they have the World Tournament units, you know, because for whatever reason they left out like him and Ultimate Gohan and like I think one more guy, I just can't think of it right now. But that being said, if you do have him and you have Rosé and you run a villain team, he's a solid option. Otherwise, if you have him and you have a specialized team that can take, you know, effect with his link skills on AGL, then he's a great option as well there. So let's go ahead and move on to the next choice. Alright, so we talked about Genocide Incarnate, Frieza, and his brother Cooler. So for today's video, in this portion of the video, we're gonna go ahead and, you know, we're gonna take a lighter aspect and not as crazy. We're gonna go and look at Star-Crossed Fate Bardock now. This is a R unit. He is acquirable from the last battle event, which comes every now and then on Global and Japan. It used to be very common on Global, but now as Global's been pushing forward with more content, they have reluctantly not been releasing a lot of these older events. But that being said, he's an R unit. Let's look at the card. AGL type leader skill, attack plus 20%. He is R card, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, with a extreme modifier. So Final Spirit Cannon, extreme damage to one enemy, not bad. Passive skill, against the odds. Attack plus 40% when facing 2 or more enemies. Link skills are Saiyan Warrior Race, the Saiyan Lineage, Team Bardock, and Saiyan Pride. He has 6,300 attack, or HP, 4,000 attack, and 2,399 defense. I may be low or high balling some of these numbers, forgive me for that, but off the bat, once again, like I kind of talked about already, R unit, free unit, acquirable through the event, so that means that he does have a farmable super attack. I believe his drop is 100% guaranteed on like hard difficulty for the stages he farms on. So that being said, it shouldn't be very difficult to farm him. He has a low cost, right? So low cost means that he can be used on super strike teams if you were looking for something like that. He has a farmable super attack, which works very well with his extreme modifier. So there aren't very many R and below units. Honestly, only 2 come to mind, R and below, R and N units that have extreme, and it's him and the strength NTN. I'm gonna have to drop that NTN in the strength video. Just a little bit of spoiler there for you guys. But that being said, extreme modifier, low cost, you can definitely find a usage for him, especially because he does have the farmable super attack. Now, let's look at the cons for him. Obviously, his main con actually would be that his passive skill doesn't work on most of the events due to the requirements. You have to be fighting 2 or more enemies, so that means that innately, I was just talking about super strikes, you're gonna have to be banking on his low cost and extreme because he's not gonna get that 40% buff, because on super strike events, you're not gonna fight 2 enemies, so it's not very useful there as far as the passive skill goes, and it's 40%. If you were able to trigger that, he would be a really hard hitting unit as far as like an AGL, Mono AGL R based unit. On top of that, his only other con is that he's a natural R, which works to his con and to his pros because of the low cost, but the con is it means he has low base stats, so the extreme doesn't really get properly utilized sometimes. But that's pretty much Bardock, and we'll be back with another Bardock in this list, so catch you guys in a sec. Red hot martial artist Paikuhan, you know, from the Western Galaxy, I think, the Western Quadrant. Forgive me if I just sound stupid because I'm totally wrong. But anyways, leader skill, AGL and strength type units, key +3, which is awesome. Hyper Tornado causes huge damage to the enemy and lowers attack, which is good as well. Passive skill, Stoic Strength, all allies attack plus 15% when HP is 50% or above. Gentleman, Cold Judgment, Bombardment, Shocking Speed, Strongest Duo on Earth, Soul vs. Soul, Super Strike, and 7800 HP, 6600 attack, 4100, 4200 defense. Off the bat, this guy's so stoic that he's awesome. His Stoic Strength and Hyper Tornado are amazing. I'm just totally rambling here. Let's go ahead and get into some of his pros and his cons. Okay, so the pros of Paikuhan: lowers attack, which is amazing. As I talked about with Frieza, it's very useful, has its uses, and it's not very common amongst AGL units that you would even, you know, generally choose to run. There aren't very many optimal AGL units that do that, so it has its needs and its necessities as far as when you would apply that. And if you need a little bit more tankiness, Paikuhan is your guy, because him in conjunction with units that tank a little better is a nice little thing there. Actually, I didn't even know that he had that. I probably should have used him. Maybe I wouldn't have, but he would have been a good choice in my Mono AGL versus Zamasu event. Another pro of Paikuhan is that he has a free farmable super up to super attack 15, of course, but at super attack 15 he does get 20% stronger when he super attacks, so totally worth the farm. His great passive there, 15% attack for all allies. Now, it's nowhere near as good as the passive on Cooler, but that being said, 15% is nothing to snuff at. That's basically like, what, Fierce Battle? You know, the boost that you get from Fierce Battle Link. So 15% on top of any other Link skills that are active at the time, buffing up your other units, makes him hit just a little bit harder to get them over that hump to where they can do a bit more damage. He also has Shocking Speed, which is always a plus on an AGL unit because that is the main link, aside from maybe Prepare for Battle. Shocking Speed is the main link that AGL utilizes. That being said, let's look at some of the restrictions and cons on this unit. Speaking of restrictions, he does have that 50% restriction on his passive. Even though with Super Vegito and Golden Frieza it is easier to maintain, just that number 50% sometimes may be a difficult thing to manage depending on how you play the game and what units you're playing with at the time. That being said, he's obviously a free unit, so he doesn't once again have good base stats. So, you know, that 15%, while it applies to him, he does get the 20% buff when he's at Super Attack 15. He will hit a little harder. The 6600 attack in conjunction with a huge damage modifier, even though he's on Mono AGL with double Vegito leads, I'm throwing a lot of math at you guys, he's still not going to hit very hard. He'll probably hit for about 120k. You know, is that worth it for you? You have to make that choice, that determination, because while he's hitting for that, he's making everyone else hit a little harder. But on top of that, you have to kind of look at his passive skill with that 15% and say, well, that's good, but at the same time, if I'm running a bunch of Saiyans and you're taking up a slot that a Saiyan could have with potentially Saiyan Warrior Race and Super Saiyan and maybe Fierce Battle, that 15% isn't as enticing. So it just comes up to you once again, and all these other units in this video, it comes down to you and what you would like to use with those units. So let's go ahead and check out the next one. I'll be right back, guys. So this is pretty much the last one, aside from the honorable mention that I'll get to after this, because obviously this was 5 and somehow I wound up with 6. So we're gonna look at the last choice, Obotchaman. Now, polite superpower Obotchaman. Leader skill is AGL types HP and defense plus 60%. Super attack is Greeting Gun, causes supreme damage to one enemy. Passive skill, Sincere Heart, attack and defense plus 60% when facing one enemy. Mechanical Menace is Brainiac, Gentleman, Courage, Shocking Speed, and Penguin Village. Let's look at the pros and the cons of the unit. Obviously, I mean, on top of that, he's got almost 9,000 HP, which is really, really good. He also has about 7,500 attack, and, you know, he's got a 4,600 defense. This guy has really good stats. You know, that's one of the pros for him. I actually didn't list him in here, but, you know, list the stat thing in here, but that is actually a really good thing for him. He has really, really solid stats all around. So that being said, with my natural pros, his passive works really well on Dokkan boss stages. So he's basically the inverse of that Bardock in that he works with one enemy, which is actually, you'd say, one enemy, whatever, but that sucks. No, it actually really doesn't, because you're facing one enemy most of the time in a lot of these events, and when it comes down to like the final battle of the events, the final phase. So that being said, Obotchaman can come in clutch with that, because he also gets a defense buff, which is 60%, that plus the 140% if he's on Mono AGL with double Vegito leads. His defense stat can get really, really high. So that being said, basically nice tank as far as normal attacks go, and he'll hit pretty hard too with that Supreme and that 60% to the attack, and then plus the 140 from the other Vegito leads. But as far as other pros for this unit go, he does have shocking speed once again, which, as I've said before, is the main link for AGL. Now, he also is acquirable from the Arale banner. Now, I don't believe he's even acquirable anymore, so you kind of had to have gotten him at that point. I don't think you can get him anymore, which is a massive con. But one of the pros to that is that he was acquirable in the guaranteed summon, so you didn't have to spend a bunch of stones and try to get him. He was acquired from a guaranteed SSR summon for the Arale banner. Let's look at the natural cons of this unit. The rest of his links aren't very common on Mono AGL, but that's more of a nitpick. That's not really his fault. It's just the rest of his links aren't very common, and that really applies to a lot of the other units on here. I really didn't have very many cons for Obotchaman, to be honest. His passive doesn't activate in scenarios where you're going to be fighting multiple enemies either, which once again is more of a nitpick. You just don't bring him on stages where you got to fight multiple bosses. It's really just honestly how it works out, because in Dokkan events, you're still going to come down to fighting one enemy, even if you start off fighting 3 or 4 or 5 in the first stage. After that, it turns out fighting one enemy for the boss stage. So anyways, we'll be back with the honorable mentions, so I'll catch you guys in a sec. Okay, so for the last unit on the list, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about him. You guys can see him on screen. We're looking at a new legend begins, Super Saiyan Bardock, the AGL unit that has a natural SR, which kind of works to his detriment and to his benefit. So let's talk about his pros and his cons. We'll get up out of here. So honorable mention Bardock. Pretty common summon rates for me, in my opinion. He comes very often. I don't know if that's the same way for you, but I get this guy really, really commonly. His passive gives him 50% more on his super attacks, so he will be hitting a bit harder than your average SR, and to a degree, I guess, if he gets super attack, it's high enough, than some of the SSRs as well. So that being said, he also has Super Saiyan and the other optimal key link for AGL, which would be prepared for battle. We talked about shocking speed. He doesn't have that, but prepared for battle is basically the next best thing. The only real cons I found for him are that he has low base stats because he's a natural SR, which once again isn't his fault. He also has a huge modifier, which is probably there to balance out his passive. I mean, if they gave him extreme coupled with, you know, what seemed to be, in my opinion, common summon rates. I get this guy like every multi-summon. It's crazy. Every other multi-summon. So that with the 50%, he'd probably be hitting a little bit too hard with at least extreme. So honestly, they probably should have made him a natural SSR anyway, but they didn't. So this Bardock is really, really good. Very useful unit, to be honest. Low cost means he works well in Super Strikes teams if you need to do that. So that being said, this is the end of the video. So once again, this is a new series I'm starting here. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please punch that subscribe button if you happen to be new. And in the comment section below, I want you guys to list some units that you thought I probably was going to mention, or units that you thought I should have mentioned that are optimal units or not optimal units, whatever you want to put down below that are units that people should be running or should be considering running on their AGL team. Once again, this is a new series, so I'll be back with the other types as well later on. So if you guys enjoyed, punch the subscribe button if you're new. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you feel I deserve a like, leave one down below as well. But that's been it for me. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.